have to tell you a little bit of a secret. You know, the High Commissioner, Madikwe from Nigeria to Canada, has been a champion in Canada of this conference. He's been the one fighting for it, working for it, going to his country many times. But there was a champion also in his country, in Nigeria, and that's our next speaker, Minister Aganga, Minister of Trade. He's been with us at the mission when we were there about 2 months ago. He took it at heart. He worked very, very hard to make sure it was a success. And we are so pleased, Minister, that you are joining us, and we are anxious to hear your good words. Minister.
So, I'm doing a presentation. Where's the... Let us just slide thing. Yeah, who's controlling it? Right, that's absolutely fine. Your Excellency, the Vice President, Architect Nanandi Mohammed Sambo, the Chairman of PDP, Dr. Bamanga Tuka, Your Excellencies, the Executive Governors of at least about 12 or 14 Nigerian states that are present here today, the Honorable Ministers, my colleagues who are here with us today, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My brief is very simple. My brief is to introduce to you what we call and what is known globally as a new, but more importantly, the last frontier, and that is Africa. For those who are not familiar with Africa, we're talking about a continent with about 54 sovereign states, a continent that has a market of about 1 billion people, a continent that will produce 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world by 2015. We're talking about a continent where at least 17 African countries are ahead of India in terms of doing business ranking in the world. We are talking about a continent that has about 35 countries ahead of Russia in terms of TIS ranking, in terms of transparency and corruption. We're talking about a continent that in total has a GDP of about $2 trillion. That is a new frontier, the new continent of Africa. But today it's not about Africa, today it's about Nigeria. And of course, for those who are not familiar with Nigeria, we start by saying, yes, Nigeria is in West Africa. Yes, it has about 250 ethnic groups, so it's very diverse. Our system is very presidential, very similar to the United States. Canada here, you operate more the British system, where you have House of Commons and you have the Senate, which means that because we run a presidential system, we have the presidency, we have the FCT in Abuja, and we have 36 states, and in total about 774 local governments. So in terms of the top tier of governance in the country. As the Vice President said, when you look at Africa, Nigeria on its own, it's a country that has large natural resources. So when you talk about energy, for example, yes, we're in the top 10 in terms of oil production. We're in the top 10 in terms of gas reserve all over in the world. We have 34 solid minerals in commercial quantity. We have about 84 million hectares of land on which almost everything can grow. Think about Brazil. The climate, the environment, the agriculture there is very similar to Nigeria. And only 40% of that land is cultivated today. That is opportunity for those in that sector. The message here is that it's a large natural resource economy. When investors want to invest in anywhere in the world, they're looking at certain things. They also want to look at the market. We have a large market. It's a country that has about 167 million people growing at 3% per annum. When you compare that to Canada today, Canada is about 34 million people growing at 0.79% per annum. So it's 5 times the size of Canada. But it's not about today, it's about today and tomorrow. This is a continent that's expected to be the 3rd largest nation in the world by 2070 after India and China. So when you talk about market, it's a big market. It's not just about Nigeria, it's about ECOWAS. It's a country that's part of the 1 billion market in Africa, and of course a D8 country, which means another 1 billion people. In terms of the population, it's a very, very young country, population-wise. The average age is about 18.6 years old. And the middle class is growing, but today it stands at about 23% of that population. So when, as I said, an investor wants to look at any country or any investment opportunity, an investor looks for 4 things. He needs the capital, he needs the technical know-how, he needs the raw materials, and he needs the market. Capital, know-how, technology, you can move anywhere in the world. You can move from Canada to Nigeria, Nigeria to Canada. Raw materials, you cannot move. Market, you cannot move. And those things we have in abundance in Nigeria. That is one of the reasons why it is today referred to not only as a new frontier, but the last frontier you cannot afford to ignore. I've talked about the link to ECOWAS. Now let's look at the economy itself. When you look at 2012, the economy grew at 6.58%. But in fact, the true story there is that non-oil grew at about 7.8%. So the non-oil sector is growing faster than the oil sector. But what is far more interesting is that in the last 14 years, when you look at the growth rate, the average growth rate has been about 7%. When you compare the 6.58% to Canada, for example, Canada is growing at last year, for example, the economic growth was about 1.9%. When you compare the growth to the world average, in 2012, world average was 3.8%, South Africa was 3.1%, and Sub-Saharan Africa was 4.9%. It was the highest in that region. When you compare to the BRICS economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, only China and India grew faster than Nigeria. And we compare to the high-income economies in the world today, OECD, EU, United States was 1.7%, non-OECD countries was about 5.6%, less than the 6.58%. So in terms of the economy, it is growing, and it's growing faster. Now, I say one story, is this a one-year story? No, it isn't a one-year story. This next chart tells you about the growth of the economy since 2007. When you look at Nigeria, that's why the average in the last 10, 12 years, I did say 14, is about 7%. You will see that since 2007, it has continued to grow. That is the first bar there. The first bar here, that's Nigeria, 6.6%, 7%, 7.9%, 7.45%, 6.58%. When you look at Brazil, for example, in 2009, when the whole world was going in a different direction, we all suffered, Canada also did, Nigeria has continued to grow. Brazil came down by 0.6%. Russia was down by 7.8%. India, same pattern as Nigeria. China, those are the 3 big continents or countries that you will see in the next 20 years in terms of economic development. South Africa, of course, in 2009 was down 1.7%. And currently is growing at 3.1%. So it's not a one-year story. It's sustainable economic growth over the years. When you're looking at the prediction, according to PwC, by 2050, Nigeria is predicted to be the 13th largest economy in the world. That is PwC, that's not Nigerian speaking. When you look at the economy also, it's not just about GDP growth. It's a composition of the GDP. So today, our GDP is largely agricultural, roughly at a rate of 40%. Then, of course, you have wholesale and retail trade, which is about 19%. And, of course, you have the oil and gas, which is about 13% of the GDP. So oil and gas actually accounts for only 13% of GDP. When you compare that to Canada today, roughly, you put your economy in 3 boxes. Industries account for 70% of your GDP. Industry accounts for 28% of your GDP. That's where you're one of the most industrial countries in the world, 11th economy in the world, because of your growth in terms of industrial development. And agriculture, in spite of big land, agriculture only represents 1.9% of your GDP. That is opportunity for us, and I'll explain that later. When you look at the sectorial growth, telecom has been growing at an average of about 30% per annum since it was privatized by the federal government of Nigeria. Other sectors are growing at double digits. Solid minerals, hotels and restaurants, building and construction, real estate, wholesale retail is all growing. So you have all the sectors, important sectors, growing at double digits. The world we live today, you have countries controlling more than 3/4 of the GDP of the world, grappling with a number of issues. They're grappling with sovereign debt crisis because of the level of debt. They're grappling with budget deficit control. And of course, they have fiscal consolidation policies that are, of course, and low growth. We have in Nigeria a very different situation. When you look at the debt to GDP ratio in Nigeria, when you look at the debt in Nigeria to start with, the debt to GDP ratio is only about 18.8%, less than 20%. That is strong macroeconomic environment with all the indicators in the right direction. South Africa is about 35.6%. Egypt is about 85.7%. But what's more important about the debt of Nigeria is that more than or close to 80% of our loans are concessionary loans. What that means is that they are all cost inclusive, not more than 3% in terms of the cost of finance. They're long-term loans of about 20 to 40 years with moratoriums of about 5 to 10 years. So in terms of the quality of the loan, it is very good. In terms of what it's used for, it's primarily for infrastructure development for the economy. So overall, we are in a good space, and we have fiscal space. That is why it's not surprising that when S&P and Moody did their calculation recently, you'll find that many countries have been downgraded, including the United States, including South Africa, including the United Kingdom, including Spain. There are very few countries where you've seen the grading go up in a different direction. Nigeria is one of the few countries that has gone up. When I say debt to GDP ratio, to put it in context, proper context, when you look at that chart, that next chart, that green bar is Nigeria. That's 18.8%. That compares to Japan, which is between about 225%. Italy, about 150%. The average for Europe is about 80.4%. That compares to Nigeria, 18.8%. United States, for example, also about $16 trillion. So what we're saying is that it is, for every reason, the macroeconomic environment is very, very strong, and that's the basis, that's a foundation for attracting investment into any economy. When you look at the exchange rate, it has remained stable, many thanks to the CBN. And that's one of the areas, the fundamentals that investors are looking for. When you look at the capital markets, we've had issues with capital markets, but when you look at it also, we're seeing growth there. Our capital markets grew by about 35.84% between 2012 and 2013. And in fact, when compared that to FTSE grew by about 5.75%. When compared to the United States Composite, it's about 2.72%. And of course, so far, in 2013, the growth is roughly about 20%. When you look at our external reserves, we are building our external reserves again. And of course, our external reserves today, roughly at the end of March, is about 48.6 billion. And we're still moving ahead in terms of the foreign reserves. We are talking of a country that is ready for reform, that is reform-friendly in every sector. When you speak to each of the ministers here today, there's reform in each of their sectors, in housing, in mining, in urban development, in education, in power, in health, in national planning, all across the sector. there is reform across the country, all over. It's reform friendly. That is what we mean, part of what we mean when we talk about transformation of the country. When we talk about electoral reform, of course, the president started with that when he had the last election. And that election was adjudged as one of the, if not the, freest and most credible election which Nigeria has ever had. There's investment climate reform, and of course, part of what is coming out of that is what the Vice President has talked about the establishment of the first National Competitiveness Council to drive our competitiveness as a country. We're using the OECD policy framework for investment to capture about 7 different areas of policies that affect investment. We have reviewed all our laws that are related to investments and are amending them as we speak. So, as the Vice President also said, we have OSIC, which is one-stop shop for investors. And of course, we have a range of incentives to encourage investments into the sector. Power sector, as I said, the reform is ongoing. The minister will tell you more about this. Capital markets, oil and gas, where we have the PIB, fiscal reform, where we set up the Sovereign Wealth Fund in 2010, and agricultural reform. There's reform all over the place. What does that mean for the economy in terms of investment? In 2011, according to the UNCTAD, yes, Africa's investment came down slightly because of the issues in Libya and in Egypt and the others. But Nigeria's investment into Nigeria grew by about 46% in that year to about $8.9 billion. It became the #1 destination for investment in Africa. And what is far more interesting is that most of that investment came into the non-oil sector. We are back as a country to the pre-crisis levels in terms of investment. When people talk about transparency, people talk about corruption. What the country say, our job as a country, as a government, is to provide an enabling environment for the private sector to drive the economy and invest in critical sectors of the economy. Therefore, it's important that you address all the issues. I am delighted to say, and I will explain why to you, that when you look at the Transparency International rankings for the last 10 years, that is between 2001 to 2013, according to Renaissance Capital, Nigeria was the 3rd most improved nation in the world. That may come to some of you as a surprise, but I'll explain why it is not and should not be a surprise to you. Every nation in the world, in Canada, United States, Europe, every nation has gone through this phase of dealing with corruption. And when you look at the research across the world today, there are only 4 or 5 main things that address corruption in a sustainable manner. The 4 things are, you need to have democracy. You need to have press freedom. You need to have strong institutions. And you need to have inclusive economic growth. Those are the 4 things that every country has relied on over the decades and centuries to deal with corruption. Nigeria, for example, where are we in these 4 areas? Yes, we have a democracy, and we've had elections over a long period of time now, and of course they have been, at least the last ones were Georgia, as credible, fair, and peaceful election. The second one, do we have press freedom? Of course we have press freedom in the country. That is critical for addressing the issue of corruption. The third one is about institutions. That is what this government is building. That is the focus of this government. It's not about picking 1 or 2 people and putting them in jail. It's about building institutions, strong institutions, and cleaning up each of those sectors. And I'll give you examples of some sectors we have dealt with. I will start with the electoral process. I was privileged to be the finance minister of this current president when he was fighting the last election. The amount we spent was much, much higher than any other country, or most other countries, spent on that election. Why? Because he declared that he wanted the freest and fairest election in the country. If it meant that he was going to lose the election as his 7th president, he was willing and happy to lose that election. We, as a government, invested more than 90 billion naira in that election. All the process, with new structures, with the new head of INEC appointed, everything, the institution. The president focused on the institution of INEC, controlling the election. All the biometrics data they needed, rather than have one for each state, we bought one for each senatorial district. We even wanted to do it even for smaller bills, because we wanted strong institutions and we wanted to have fair and credible elections. That we have to achieve. Today, in Nigeria today, you hear about one man, one vote. That is cleaning up the system and building institutions. Also, when you talk about corruption in the oil and gas sector, as Minister of Finance then, he directed me at the time to do the first forensic audit of the sector, which led to all this noise you hear about fraud in the fuel subsidies area. That we're cleaning up, and we're handing those people to the police. We're cleaning up the whole sector in terms of fuel subsidy, and it is part of the corruption. That's why we decided as a government to remove fuel subsidy and make sure that money goes to the right part of the economy. When you look at pension funds today, many people have gone to jail because of that. When you look at the banking sector, Nigeria is the only country in the world where chief executives of banks have been put in jail because of their role in 2008 and 2009. And as a result of that, we have one of the strongest banking sectors today and capital markets today. I must give it to Canada. You have a very good banking sector. That is why United Kingdom is now hiring your former governor of the central bank to go back to the United Kingdom and do that. When you look at agriculture, we had fertilizer scan for many years. This is the first government that has dealt with that. Now farmers get their fertilizers directly into the system. When you look at the judiciary itself, it is much stronger today. This is a government that two of the judges have been removed and one suspended because of their role in terms of making sure that we follow the rule of law. What I'm saying to you, that this is a new approach to dealing with corruption. It is a sustainable way of addressing the issue. You build institutions, you build the structures, you deal with each of the sectors, and over time, you address the issue of corruption. That is why it is not surprising that we make that progress. There are only, I repeat, 4 processes. Have democracy, have press freedom, build strong institutions, and have inclusive economic growth. We have been growing at 7%. Our focus is about inclusiveness, sharing the prosperity among Nigerians. In terms of investment opportunities, ladies and gentlemen, yes, we have strength in the area of agriculture, mining, and oil and gas. But for many years, Nigeria, as other African countries, have relied on old policies of exporting raw materials and exporting jobs. That has changed in this new frontier. This is a continent and a country that understands that value addition is a secret to industrial development. This is a country that has realized that what we need to do is take our crude oil and gas, turn them into strong petrochemical industry, turn them to fertilizer plants, turn them into refineries, turn them to plastic industry. You will create jobs and you create money and you create wealth in that process. That is the new thrust of this government. So it's about investing in the real sector of the economy. We're talking solid minerals. It's not about just taking the iron ore and exporting it. We have a big country with a high level of unemployment. We're talking about iron ore to pellets, to hot rolling mill, to cold rolling mill, to flash heat, the whole process in terms of the mining sector. We've done it successfully with cement today, where we've taken the limestone and turned that into cement. In 2002, we only had capacity of about 2 million metric tons of cement. But due to government policy, working very closely with the private sector today in Nigeria, we have a sector that now has a capacity for about 28.6 million metric tons a year. That's one of the highest in the world. We have a sector that now employs close to about 2 million people, a sector that is saving us about foreign exchange of about 210 billion naira every year because of the cement production, and a sector, because of policy, has attracted about $6 billion over the years. Now, what does that mean to an investor going to that sector? I was just looking at the audited financial statement of one of the companies in that sector that only started then. That audited financial statement showed that one company in that sector made a profit before tax of about 140 billion naira. That is close to $1 billion profit before tax. They say another company, I was looking at their first quarter results only a few days ago. That first quarter result showed a profit after tax of about 52 billion naira. Extrapolate that, financial year, that's about more than 200 billion naira after tax. That is more than $1 billion after tax. Tell me how many companies in Canada, in United Kingdom, in the United States that can boast of such big returns in just one sector of the economy. That is why Nigeria is the last frontier that every investor cannot afford to ignore. So, apart from investing in the real sector of the economy, of course, you have to invest in power, the infrastructure, the foundation, in power, in infrastructure, railroads, aviation, ports, real estate, of course, in ICT, banking sector, healthcare, marine shipping. We have the free trade zones to encourage you and the vehicles to make it happen. I will not go into details about all these sectors because the ministers are here today and we're talking more about the opportunities there. So in terms of oil and gas, of course, you have the opportunity there. In agriculture, the IRR for some of them areas, I would say tomatoes is about 20%, cassava about 19%, cotton about 20%, about 30% for maize, and rice about 33%, and soybeans 106%. But the biggest value addition you can get in the area of agriculture is in the area of sugar cane to sugar. That is where you have the biggest value addition. From the waste of producing sugar, you produce ethanol, you produce animal feed, you produce electricity, power. That is why we now have a new policy to promote sugarcane to sugar. And I will encourage you to exploit that as well. In the area of power, we have a lot to do. The Vice President has talked about this. The Minister of Power is here. She will talk to you more about the renewable opportunities in the renewable energy. Lands and housing and urban development, we have the Honorable Minister here. She will talk more about that later. Minister of Education is here. She will talk more about opportunities in work in education. Mining is here, our pride, a sector where we have 34 solid minerals in commercial quantity. There's a lot to do there, a lot of money to be made there. The minister is here and will tell you more about the opportunities there. Of course, we have aviation, and of course, we are celebrating our 100 years anniversary as a country. And to celebrate that, we are building a new what we call centenary city, which will be, we have a lot of things. We have big hotels there. We have the financial hub of Nigeria. It will be declared a free trade zone in some areas. There will be tax shelter for those who come in there. There will be rail linking the airport to the centenary city. Land equity is valued at about $4 billion, and the project will create, is expected to create about 5,000 direct jobs and 10,000 indirect jobs. I encourage you to look at that. I believe perhaps the Minister of FCT in his presentation will be talking about that. We have many success stories and case studies that I would have liked to share with you, but in the interest of time, I will leave that for another occasion. But if you look at the success in the telecom sector, it has gone so well that, you know, the tele-density has increased from about 0.73% in 2001 to 76.7% at the end of 2012. That is how big the change is. Speak to MTN, they will tell you how much they have made in the country. Speak to Vodafone, they will tell you it was a missed opportunity. They were supposed to invest when they started. They were looking at Nigeria in a very different light. Today, they're begging to come in. They cannot come in. Speak to MTN. They will tell you how much money they are making in the country. In terms of government policies, drive, and all that, the Vice President has already shared that with you. But it is because of government policy and approach towards investment. That was why this ministry, which I now head, that's why the mandate now includes investments, attracting investment into all sectors of the economy. We've made it easier for you for investment to flow by making sure that in each embassy, working with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, that each embassy has a trade and investment desk. In addition to that, I have my own people in each of the regions as regional investment coordinators, coordinating investment flow into the country and answering your questions as and when you need, you have questions about them. In addition, of course, you have the one-stop shop at the federal government level, but also we have them at the state government level as well. So what do people say about Nigeria? This is going to be my concluding part of my presentation. At one investment forum, investors were asked, which country in Africa do they expect to have the best overall prospect for investment returns in the next 3 years? That red line up there is Nigeria. About 51 of them said Nigeria. Now, this is continuing. The Vice President has talked a lot about incentives, but even in this presentation, we have sectorial incentives also for each sector, whether it's aviation, it's ICT, agriculture, we have incentives for all of them. Now, when you look at where is investment coming from, I'm delighted to say that we are receiving, we're inundated, and we're not surprised by that, with investment calls and visits from all over the world. When you look at this map is telling you where and who we've had some of the investment interests we've had in the country. If you look at Canada or look at America, for example, now you have GE. GE has just signed a contract with Nigeria, and Australia to sign that contract with them, that they will invest $1 billion in Nigeria over the next 5 to 10 years, starting with 250 million naira this year. What are they going to be doing? They are going to be doing assembling and manufacturing later turbines for the power sector. We have an understanding with them to go into assembling and manufacturing locomotives for the rail sector. We have an understanding with them to go into the health sector as well. But this $1 billion over this period of time is all to do with the power turbine. And also we have an agreement with them to work with us to produce 10,000 megawatts of power over the next 10 years. The same agreement we have with Eletrobras in Brazil, 10,000 megawatts of power, but more in the hydro sector. Cebion is a US investor who has taken advantage of the money provided by US Exim to American investors. By the way, US Exim took a very hard look at Nigeria. For many years, they were not in Nigeria. 2 years ago, I met with their president and vice president, and they said they did a review. They looked at 103 countries where the growth is going to come, where the opportunities will come in the next 5 to 10, 15 years. They narrowed the 103 countries to 9 countries. Nigeria was in the 9 countries. And because of that, US Exim has dedicated a credit line of about, I think, $5 billion for Nigeria, for any American investor who wants to invest in Nigeria. That is what we are encouraging Canada to do. We've had this discussion yesterday with your ministers. Most countries are doing that. They are providing finance for their local investors to come and invest in Nigeria because they want to participate in that opportunity. We're talking about automobile industry. We have a new policy coming up. Names like Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Hyundai are all interested in coming to the country. So it cuts across different economies, whether it's Sinopec in China, whether it's Electrolux in Brazil, whether it's Gulf Warehousing Company in Qatar, whether it's FMG from Australia, whether it's P&G from the United States. They have one of their biggest plants in Nigeria today. So it is happening. But when you look at Canada, we have a strong link with Canada. We are growing our economic ties, and there's a strong understanding between the two countries. It's evident that we are going to develop a strong symbiotic relationship between Canada and Nigeria. We already have some companies operating in Nigeria from Canada. You've heard about Manitoba Hydro, Nexen, BlackBerry, Bombardier in the aviation sector, Clean Energy Company, and others. In the areas of trade, total trade was about $3 billion last year. Grew from about 750 million in 2007, thereabout, to about $3 billion. That $3 billion has a breakdown of about, yes, oil and gas about $2 billion, merchandise about $300 million, and of course services in trade about $670 million. At first, the Minister for Trade here and I have an understanding that we want to work together and improve the volume of trade, double it, non-oil sector, before or by 2015. And when you look at our exports and imports from Canada, most of our imports include wheat, vehicles, airplanes, air pumps, bitumen, asphalt, And our exports to Canada include crude oil, of course, cocoa beans, natural rubber, sesame seeds, and ginger. Quite a number of observers have been looking at Nigeria and have been commenting on Nigeria. But let me share some of their comments with you. The last time the Polish Prime Minister was in Nigeria, about 2-3 weeks ago, he did say that the image of Nigeria has never been higher internationally than it is today. Every country wants to have a strategic relationship with Nigeria. That's why we're not surprised that only a few weeks back, the president of Brazil was in Nigeria with about 100 delegates from Brazil. We will have quarterly investment forum or investors coming from Brazil to Nigeria going forward. I just came back from there about a month ago. The president of Indonesia was in Nigeria with at least 8 or 9 of his ministers and 50 businessmen from Indonesia. So the interest has never been higher than it is today. And that is because we have a beautiful story to share. We are sharing that stories all over the world. And the world is taking notice and know that they cannot afford to ignore Nigeria. If I speak in terms of my former colleague at Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill, he once said, if Nigeria were to show the same increase in growth environment score over the next decade, many investors will look back and say, why the hell did I not invest in Nigeria? That's an independent. It was James that came up with the BRICS economies and all that, and the N11 economies. Then, of course, let me refer to the global chairman of KPMG, who in March 2013 said, people are now focused on the mint economy. Mint meaning Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. They are the 4 countries that international investors are really focused on for growth and investment. Note the letter N there. I always end my slide with this final quote of David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And I thank him for this quote. And he did say, tell me this, which part of the world has seen its number of democracies increase nearly 8-fold in just 2 decades? Eastern Europe? No. It is Africa. Which continent has seen 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world today? Asia? The answer is no. It is Africa. And finally, he said, which country is predicted by some to have the highest average GDP growth in the world over the next 40 years? You might think Brazil. You might think Russia. You might think India. You might think China. No. Think Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, think Nigeria. Thank you very much.